Hey everyone, my name is Marvin and I like every type of art. Today I'm building this beautiful diorama of Chinese temple on a cliff, complete with a real small waterfall. If you want to see how I made it and what it looks like in the end, stick around. First I need a suitable container. For that I'm using this large glass jar with a cork lid. It's the right height and width for what I have in my mind. Now I need preserved moss. This moss has been treated to last, so I want dry out in the air and doesn't need any water. That makes it perfect to attach to the back wall of the jar. I start by cutting the moss into the right sized pieces with my scissor. Then I brush plenty of wood glue on the back. Wood glue works great because the moss absorbs it, and once it dries it becomes transparent, so you won't see it anymore. I carefully press each piece of moss into the jar by hand, making sure it sticks firmly. I glue enough moss to create an even surface and straight edges, so I end up with a nice moss back wall inside the jar. For the waterfall I need a small water pump. I'm using this 3V mini USB water pump. It's powerful enough and small enough to fit into the jar. If I just put the pump directly into the jar, it wouldn't look very nice. So I'm going to building a casing for it. First I measure the pump along with the water tube and transfer the measurements onto a piece of XPS foam board. Then I cut out the pieces with my utility knife. The casing needs two side walls, a back wall and of course a front wall. After cutting everything out, I glue the pieces together with some super glue. Once the glue sets, I clean up the edges. To make sure the pump can draw water properly, I cut out a small circular selection from the foam board using my hobby knife. Then I place a pump with the water tube attached into the finished casing. Now I need to turn the pump casing into a cliff. For that I'm using this dry driftwood. I collected outside a while ago and it's been sitting at home for ages. The wood is dry and breaks easily into small pieces. I do this with my hands, and for spots where my hands aren't enough, I use my skiver to help. I fix the pieces onto the casing with super glue, arranging them to create a nice shape that resembles a rock cliff. Once all the pieces are glued in place, I add smaller, finer pieces of wood on top to fill in any gaps. Finally, I secure everything with diluted glue. After it has all dried, I primed the casing off camera. Next, I use various shades of paint to color the cliff. I'm using green, yellow, red and brown tones. These are watered down so that the colors blend easily. Once the paint has dried, I apply a black wash across the entire surface. The paint runs into all the cracks and gaps into the wood, giving it more texture and depth. After that I dry brush the entire surface with a light grey tone to highlight the details. Next I apply some glue to the upper part of the cliff and attach fine artificial moss flakes there. The cliff is now complete, so it's time to assemble the two Chinese temples. I've already prepared a few pieces for this. First I attach small thin pieces that I've cut from XPS foam board. These serve as decorative wooden beams. I attach one beam to each side wall of the first temple. The windows still need glass. Off camera I brush some UV resin onto a piece of baking paper and cured it with a UV lamp. Now I can use my utility knife to cut the resin into the right size, fitting perfectly onto the back of the front wall. This makes it look like the windows have real glass panes installed. Now I'm going to assemble the finished walls into a complete building. I apply some super glue to the sides of the front wall and attach it to the first side wall. Then I attach the second wall. Next the building needs 4 support pillars to hold the roof. For this I'm using 4 small cardboard tubes that I cut from cotton swabs. I attach these to the building's foundation using super glue. For the roof I cut a piece of paper and now roll the side around my hobby knife to create that upward curve typical of Chinese roofs. Lastly, I attach the roof sides, which are also cut from paper. I set the roof aside, trim the building to the right height with my utility knife and smooth the edges with a file. Then I apply some super glue to the bottom of the building and stick it onto the foundation. Next I attach 2 small beams to the foundation. I place the first one on the front wall, centered between the 2 support pillars, and the second one on the left side of the building. These small beams are cut from cardboard and are meant to represent an edge or a boundary for the foundation. Now our little temple gets a railing. I've cut small pieces of thin wire to the right length, and I'll attach them with some super glue between the support pillars. I'll do this on the front side of the building and on the left side. I'm leaving the right side open because I'll be adding a small wooden path there shortly. Finally, I glue the roof on top and our first little temple is finished. To make sure the entire diorama looks cool and has a nice atmosphere, we need some light shining through the window. For that, we'll need an LED. I'm using this LED tea light. I break it open with a pair of pliers and remove the LED. This LED is perfect for the effect I want because it doesn't give off static light. It flickers slightly, which adds to the atmosphere. Next I use my soldering iron to attach 2 wires to the LED contacts with a bit of solder. I use black for positive and purple for negative. For the second temple, which I build shortly, I'm attaching 2 additional wires so the power can reach further down. I solder another wire to the positive and one to the negative contact of the first LED. On the other side of the wires I solder the second LED, which I remove from another LED tea light. Now that all the wires are properly connected, I make a battery holder into the lid of the jar. To do this, I place the battery on the lid and trace around it with a pen, giving me the right size for the battery's indentation. Using my hobby knife and sculpting tools, I scrape some cork from the lid until the battery fits perfectly into the hole. Then I drill a hole next to the battery spots in the jar's lid. I start with a small drill bit to make a pilot hole, then use a larger bit to widen it. Next I take a small switch I had lying around in a drawer and insert into the hole. I attach the wire coming from the positive end of the first LED to one side of the switch. Then I take another piece of black wire and solder it to the other terminal of the switch. Off camera I drilled another small hole next to the switch in the lid and fused both wires through it. The contact from the second wire was placed on top, and I used a piece of aluminium wire to hold it down, ensuring contact between the wire and the battery. Next I start building the second temple. It follows the same structure as the first temple, but the main difference is that it's a bit smaller and has only 2 support pillars of the roof instead of 4. After finishing that, I attach the first temple to the top of the cliff using glue. Now I'm cutting small pieces from popsicles, sticks and XPS foam board to create the next part. I attach the first piece of the right side of the temple, and this will be the start of a pathway leading up to the upper temple. I also add a small access platform to the right side, and from there I'll attach a ladder that I've built using more pieces of popsicle sticks. To finish off the access path, I'm adding a railing on one side. I'm using thin wire for this, and I secure it in place with super glue. Afterward, I move on the roof tiles of the temple. I had some small strips pre-cut using my plotter, and I'm now layering them one by one, starting from the bottom and working upwards. I secure each strip with glue. Once all the tiles are in place, I trim off the excess from both sides to clean up the edges. Now that the entire structure is built, I can finally move on to painting everything. I start with red acrylic paint and begin painting the support pillars and the railing of the temple. If you look at reference images online, you notice that most Chinese buildings often feature red paint. When combined with a dark roof, it creates a striking contrast. I also paint the support pillars of the lower temple red, along with the railing of the wooden pathway. Next I paint the walls of the temple in a brown shade. This particular color is called amber, and it complements the red support pillars really well. For the roof of both temples I use a dark purple grey tone. The wooden pathway along with all the support beams and the ladder are also painted in the same brown shades of the buildings. Next I apply a dry brush to both temples' roofs using a light grey tone to give the surface more depth. This adds more texture and structure to the overall look. I then paint the walls of the temples with a lighter shade of brown, which adds more details and realism to the wooden surfaces. The support beams of the lower building and the wooden pathway also receive a lighter dry brush for added texture. Finally, I place 2 small decorative tufts of grass on top of the cliff to give the scene a more lively and natural feel. After finishing the painting, I use some UV resin to attach the first LED inside the upper temple. Then I realized I had forgotten to cut out the windows in the lower temple, so I quickly did that and off camera added 2 window panes made from UV resin just like before. I then placed the second LED in the lower temple and secure all the wires to the back of the cliff using some more UV resin. Once that's done, I can finally place the cliff inside the glass. Next, I drop small stones into the glass to cover the bottom part of the pump housing. These stones also added a nice atmosphere to the diorama or make the whole scene feel more complete. Finally, I pour some water into the glass, bring the small waterfall to life. And with the last step, I'm done. The Chinese cliff temple diorama is complete. And now for you, the final reveal. We've reached the end of the video and overall I'm really happy with how it turned out. As you can see, the water turned a bright yellow because of the moss, but honestly, I think it looks pretty cool. A huge thanks to everyone who watched the video all the way through and for your amazing support. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of my future videos. Thanks again and I'll see you in the next one.